Please join me in welcoming Helen Thayer.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here this morning. Today I'm going to take you all with me on a long walk to the magnetic North Pole. It took me just about a month, but I can tell you it will take us a little shorter time this morning. Now, there are 4 major poles in the world: the North Geographic, the South Geographic. But the magnetic North Pole is very different. So I decided I'm going to go there, and I also knew navigation would be very, very difficult because of the lack of a magnetic compass. You can't use that compass because you're in the magnetic field. Also, I knew there was an enormous population of polar bears in the area, one of the largest in the world. And so I thought, now, if I can learn to live with those animals, and being an animal lover, I thought, what a message I can bring back to kids. The starting point was Resolute Bay, a tiny Eskimo or Inuit village way up about 600 miles north of the Arctic Circle. This is where the most wonderful people, I became friends with these people. I lived with them for several weeks because I wanted them to teach me all that they could teach me all about these polar bears. Because it's one thing seeing a polar bear in the zoo, but it's another thing meeting one out in the wild on the sea ice. You might say, well, walking to the pole is just a walk across just ice. It shouldn't be too bad. This ice pack that covers the ocean is moving all the time. So it breaks apart, it piles up into big ridges and big boulders. And so I knew that I'd have a tough time getting through some of this. But before I left, I was very concerned about polar bears. And one of the Inuit hunters had this wonderful dog. His job was to keep the polar bears out of the village. So what a perfect animal and companion to walk with me. So I bought him from the Inuit people. And of course, like all Inuit dogs, he had no name. He lived out on the ice on a 4-foot chain. He didn't know anything about any kind of shelter. They're just fed maybe, if they're lucky, 2 or 3 times a week of frozen seal meat. His lifestyle was very desperate. Now, the Inuit people are not cruel people, but these animals are just a spark plug in the engine of survival. They're a tool. But when Charlie and I met, of course, his lifestyle changed quite dramatically. I called him Charlie. I don't quite know why, but I thought, well, Charlie and Helen walking to the pole, that sounds about right. And so now we had to learn to be a team. These dogs are not used to walking at a person's side because that's not a very safe place to be. So I went out there, I fired my rifle a few times, put my tent up, but it was when I lit that stove, that tiny little stove, and I cooked a human meal. That's when Charlie and I bonded immediately. After 3 days of training, I was able to set off on my journey, confident that Charlie and I were a team and confident of my plan to get me to the pole. So off I went, and the first day my head was on a 360-degree swivel. I have never been so scared in my entire life to take that first step. But I knew I had to take that first step. I had to walk through that door of fear and get going. And I knew in my heart I'd be okay once I got going. It wasn't until the second morning I was taking my tent down around 7 in the morning, and suddenly Charlie, who was tethered to my sled close by, he began this deep rumbling growl. And I knew what I was going to see ever before I looked up. And sure enough, there was my first bear, the most beautiful animal I have ever seen in my life. But she had 2 cubs with her, and she was a very angry mother because I was close to her cubs and she felt threatened.